meeting to order. And we'll run around and introduce ourselves. This is not actually a work session, it's an informational meeting. But we are recording. Ernie Hall, Worksession-Assembly.
Amy Dembosky. Jennifer Johnston.
Tim Steele.
Bobby Gray-Jones.
And if we could get everyone over at this table.
My name is Michael Stevenson. I'm with Cling Stubbins. We're the consultant for the Ship Creek study.
I'm David Cole with Cling Stubbins.
And Dan Douglas with Cling Stubbins.
And who's going to be leading the conversation?
I'm going to be presenting.
Okay.
I'm just trying to finish it soon here. We have 1 hour, I believe.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so we'll try to move through briskly. This is our firm, Cling Stubbins. On our team is Boston Global Investors. That's a development consultant out of Boston. And they have done a number of large urban redevelopment, waterfront redevelopment projects around the world. They're on our team. Cling Stubbins is part of Jacobs, which is a large multinational architecture and engineering firm. We have a 100-person office here in Anchorage. We also have on our team USKH, Anchorage-based architecture and landscape architecture and planning firm. They've been helping us here on the ground in Anchorage. You know our names, and those are some of the people on USKH, particularly Dwayne Adams and Sarah Wilson Doyle, if you may know those names. This is our third trip to Anchorage since we've been hired. The first visit was in March, and we spent a week here. We met with numerous stakeholders from the Muni, from different organizations, from neighborhood groups and so forth, just really listening and taking notes, gathering information before we started any work. We came back in April. We had 3 public sessions. The first night was 8 presentations from people in Anchorage representing various organizations, doing short PowerPoint presentations about various aspects of Ship Creek, whether it be arts and culture, transportation, environmental, what have you. The second night was an open workshop in the Bridge Restaurant, and we had 67 people show up. They all sat at tables, and they had maps, and they sketched and wrote ideas and presented ideas that night. Then on the third night, there was an open house event in the historic train depot. We had tables set up, and people could come around and write down notes and concerns and thoughts about Ship Creek. So we gathered a ton of information. It was really great. We learned a lot. We met a lot of great people. And we've also been reading through and digesting previous reports, planning studies done for Ship Creek and downtown and Anchorage. So coming out of those meetings, a great diversity of opinions, as you would expect. Also a lot of common themes that came out. Certainly, and some examples of sketches and notes that people gave us, and we've saved and recorded them. Sustainable design, environmentally responsive design, doing something that's economically responsible and will have a return on investment. Creating connections to downtown, creating an extension of downtown to Ship Creek. Being respectful of the climate here and the sun, and the views to the mountains and Cook Inlet and the beautiful scenery. The specific history of Alaska and Anchorage, that you wouldn't want to see something that's just generic, it could be any place USA. It should really be specific to Anchorage and Alaska history and culture. That the place needs to work in all year round, not just in the summer, but also in the winter, and a place that people could use all the time. People really want to see an active place, a pedestrian-oriented place. 18-hour use, live, work, play is kind of a term we heard a lot. Many people expressed desire to see a more pedestrian-oriented neighborhood. They felt like Anchorage, like most American cities, mostly designed for cars. Like to see something that's more comfortable for walking. Access to the water was a big theme, not only to Ship Creek, but also out on the point there with the boat launch. It's one of the few places people talked about they can really get right to the water, and they love seeing the scenery and the birds and beluga whales and so forth. And then we've also met a lot with the port, with the truckers. Obviously with the railroad, we need to maintain all the vehicular movements that serve the port and the railroad, which are critical to the economy, not just Anchorage, but the whole state of Alaska. So sort of bundling all this up, some of the key themes for a vision are a new neighborhood, more compact, mixed uses, walkable, sustainable, integrating the recreational uses. One of the unique things about Anchorage, and from our perspective, Alaska is the access to the outdoors that you have. And in Ship Creek, you have opportunities to create workplaces, places to live, but you're right on a trail system, you're right on a stream where people go fishing and so forth. That's a unique thing we don't want to lose sight of. The economy, economic revitalization, what's the Alaskan economy going to be in the coming century? And for Anchorage, what are going to be the new drivers for the economy, for the new generation? How can Ship Creek be part of that? And for tourism, Anchorage is sort of a way stop presently, but how can we make it more of a destination and a point of arrival for Alaska? Not just a place on the way between Seward and Fairbanks where you might spend the night, but really a place more of a destination and arrival point. We have a real estate marketing consultant, JLL, Jones Lang LaSalle. They've been here and doing market research to help us develop a program for Ship Creek. So this is an aerial view, the site shown in red. I'm sure you know it very well. As outsiders, we're certainly struck by the setting of Anchorage at the foot of the Chugach Mountains on the Cook Inlet. It's a really spectacular natural setting, and we think whatever happens in Ship Creek should take advantage of that and those wonderful views and that environment. The specifics of our site, most of the land in the Ship Creek Valley is railroad land, and the railroad has done numerous studies in the past, I'm sure you know that, and they've identified specific parcels with specific acreages as redevelopment sites. We sort of broadened that circle of the study a bit, identified some other sites along the perimeter that could be brought into a redevelopment to help make stronger connections between Ship Creek and downtown and try to knit that all together in a more comprehensive fashion. One of the unique things about Ship Creek and one of the challenges is all the multiple uses that are sandwiched together in close proximity, from your downtown CBD to the parks and the creek itself, for all the transportation and freight-related uses, and a historic neighborhood to the north. So there's a lot of competing interests and uses there that we need to sort out and make sure they all maintain their function in the way they need to. The topography, we're in a valley, generally about 20 feet above sea level. Downtown sits on a plateau roughly around 80, so we have with variations about a 60-foot elevation change to make connections across. The railroad operations, as I said, they're critical. The main line going south to Seward follows the coast. Then it forks. We have one main line going by the passenger depot, and there's a big tour bus loading operation shown here, headquarters. And then the northern fork goes up by the rail yards, and then goes and rejoins the main line further east. And then all of that feeds the port with some spurs that go north to the port functions here. The trucking is another critical element here that needs to be accommodated. There are some problems with the way it functions now. Going southbound, most truck drivers will go take the AC Couplet Bridge and then go down C Street and north on A. They're not really in love with that. They, particularly, they don't like having to go through all the traffic lights and making the sharp 90-degree turns. If they're going northbound, they'll generally go along Whitney and then take Post Road and connect to the Glen Highway. That in and of itself has some issues. There's a real pinch point here where you have angular access by the dam. On the other side of the road, you have the old power plant. It's very constricted. It's dangerous for pedestrians. Truck drivers don't like it. There are stop signs here where trucks don't have adequate clearance. If trains are going across, there's 4 grade crossings in very close succession there. That's the intersection up here on Loop Road is very congested and gets backed up. So this is not an ideal situation. And if we think about future development and more pedestrians and more bicycle riders, these things will just become exacerbated. Connections to downtown, most of the north-south streets actually end in T's or dead ends and don't go down the hill. Primarily H and Christensen go down to the lower part of the site, and then E Street goes down and connects to C. Those are the 2 primary ones. There are some minor ones here. These are kind of a back alley connection over on K. And Barrow has a dogleg connection. Eagle has one as well, but that's a pretty steep gradient along that section. And in winter, some people say they don't like to drive that. It can be kind of a little bit sketchy. Pedestrian paths, you have the 2 wonderful trail systems, the Ship Creek Trail, Tony Knowles Trail, but they do not connect. So if you're cross-country skiing or riding your bike, it's hard to keep going from the end of this Tony Knowles Trail and get to the Ship Creek Trail. The Parks Department, we have a map that showed trail extension going south and across and connecting Government Hill. And we think in some fashion that would be something we need to incorporate in the Ship Creek plan as well. Access to the water, there are improvements that have been identified for the stream bank of Ship Creek that we think could actually be expanded. And the point out here by the boat launch, as I said, many people talked about enjoying to go out there and take in the scenery. But the way out there is not very appealing. You got to drive through the container storage area, and it's kind of a pothole, gravel kind of road. So access to that and making better use of that is something that we've been thinking about. And then views. As I showed in the photograph earlier on, the view to the west, the mountains are beautiful, and then out to the Cook Inlet, Sleeping Lady, and on nice days up to Denali, our fantastic views, nice views of downtown. We do think about the views up to the containers and the fuel storage tanks, that for certain uses we'd like to mitigate those. Those are not necessarily the most attractive views. So in terms of the sites, the zones that we see are in blue. These are mostly the railroad-owned properties that are not developed. Those could be major redevelopment areas. Then the green area is more selective infill opportunities, where there are existing uses but could be further developed. And then further east, industrial uses that over time could be also redeveloped. Then this zone here, between 3rd Avenue and our site, again, selective infill over time could help start to connect between downtown and Ship Creek. We've developed 3 options, and these are very conceptual. This week we're here to show these options and get input. We will then take all the information and feedback and go to a preferred option, one option that we'll be returning in July to present the preferred option. So we welcome your input and thoughts as we go through these, because we're trying to get as much information this week as we can and narrow it down to the preferred option.
What I'd like to do during this, if there's questions, just do directly to the presenter. Okay?
When we get to that point.
When we get to that point. But
Yeah, bro.
if you do have questions, please just.
So option 1, we we've named Downtown North, and the theme of this is downtown living, kind of a new neighborhood that's a more urban lifestyle. So it's Anchorage's new neighborhood. Here's an illustrative plan, and I'll just point out some of the key features. Here between 3rd Avenue and our site, as you know, it kind of drops off fairly steeply there. We see that as an opportunity for sort of hillside housing that could step down the hillside and be very picturesque and be a very desirable residential address there. A new town square would be here on the central site of the redevelopment area. This town square in this version is anchored with a new school and like a science-oriented children's museum that would be, the school and museum would have joint programs to reinforce each other, and a new indoor winter garden market hall that would be a year-round market space for fish market, organic produce, crafts, really anything. That would connect this town square with the new multimodal center. The railroad has told us they plan to start commuter rail service within the next year or 2 years. This would be a multimodal center, which would have a bus drop-off plaza right here, right off of North C Street. That would be connected with a new pedestrian bridge that would
Sir,
span.
excuse me for a split second.
Yes,
You said the railroad's gonna start commuter service to where?
up to the valley, what they tell us.
Using light or heavy rail?
DMU.
What's DMU?
Diesel, blah, blah, blah. It's
Something
It's
unit.
basically
It's a single-
self-propelled car, it's got a diesel.
And they wanna start doing this in a year?
It's 2014, right?
Yeah, that's what he told us.
Okay. Sorry to bother you,
That's a good question.
because just everything I've ever heard from the railroad is they've gotta have better rail lines put in, they've gotta get newer equipment, and that you'd have to go heavy rail, heavy pushers to do that.
It is, the DMU is able to drive on freight track. It is heavy rail. It's not a light rail system, which is sort of a separate category of rail, and it is allowed to drive, and it is designed to drive on freight traffic, freight rail.
Wish them luck.
There's one other item that's conspicuously absent, and that is the proposed Connect Arm Bridge.
The Cabata has been a subject of much discussion. And we've heard the spectrum goes from it'll never happen, not in my lifetime, to it's going to be there in 5 years, and everything in between. So, far be it from us to speculate on that, but we're doing nothing that would preclude, that going forward.
They have to come across that area to connect to C and A Street. which is
It
what
would,
they-
and you're going to see an option here where we're showing a connection that would provide for that connectivity. But none of these plans are dependent on it, nor do they preclude it. It's, because we don't know what the future holds for that. So, the new hillside residential community, a new town square with a market and a multimodal center. Here where the empty building where Aramark formerly occupied, we see as a great opportunity for some sort of recreation or outdoor related business, an outfitter, could have fishing gear, ski rental, bicycle rental, for people coming, spending a couple days in Anchorage, maybe want to go out the trails, something of that nature, right on the creek, right on the trail. First Avenue, the railroad tells us Odom is looking to relocate. That warehouse would be available, and we could see First Avenue being developed as a kind of little Main Street area with new businesses. The shed is already mostly leased up, the historic railroad shed, that is. It's a natural kind of intersection here of C Street and First Avenue. going right in front of the train depot. If something like a Moose's Tooth type of business, you know, for example, could go in that empty warehouse, start to spur nightlife and street activity along there, and that could eventually grow to the east. They were suggesting more residential over here to the east, which could be quite attractive with, you know, right on the creek and the trail system. And finally, to really create an amenity for people living here, the boat launch area and the boat storage area could become a park, so that the way that you go out to and the way you experience the waterfront can be a much more pleasant experience. You know, have this waterfront park. It could have even like a skating pond as part of it. We had proposed an amphitheater there. We've heard in the last couple of days, though, that wind and it'd be windy and chilly, wouldn't be pleasant to sit, so we're rethinking that idea. But I think the park could still be very good. And it'd be a great site for a hotel with the views, really great views. I think it could be a great hotel site, a hotel and a park with these amazing views. So the trail connectivity would be much improved. The Tony Knowles Trail at Elderberry Park, where it goes under the track, it could continue straight on the coastal side and then go through this new park, come back and reconnect through our site to Ship Creek. And we very much think the trail should go right through the site. Because when we think about this year-round and kind of recreational theme, we love the idea of people cross-country skiing or bicycling, you go right up to a cafe or restaurant, you know, right off with your bike or your skis or your hiking, whatever. Really want to integrate that outdoors aspect to any kind of redevelopment, because we think it's what makes it unique. The pedestrian bridge I mentioned would be a further linkage back to this planned trail system. And then we think connecting to Government Hill is important, and we've heard you know, dozens of people come up to us and mention that. We have a couple ideas for that. One of those is we think it might be possible with further study to actually attach a pedestrian bridge to the AC bridge structure, because it'd be fairly lightweight, and then it could go, for example, under the main roadway, and then you would have a much safer, much more pleasant way that you wouldn't have to cross these acceleration ramps to get on it and make the crossing over to downtown. Water access, there are already stream bank improvements underway in the area around the Bridge Restaurant, but they could possibly be extended and make more of a green setting for Ship Creek, and then the park would be a much improved waterfront access experience. The street grid would be extended to connect the various sites, and so the different uses would be park, hotel, residential, school and cultural, new market hall, and then business and residential further to the east. Now, many people have said this new development needs something that's really a striking design feature, something that kind of people would recognize as a symbol. And so in each scheme we've identified some opportunities. In this one, certainly the park itself could be one of these, something that is a highly visible landmark. This new museum and school and town square with the winter garden structure could be such a thing. Even a pedestrian bridge, if it was designed the right way, it could be a highly visible, beautiful structure. And another idea is if you took the AC couplet bridge, even you could do an art or light installation. These are some examples of just by commissioning an artist to do some sort of light sculpture or some other type of installation. That could suddenly become much more attractive, especially at night. Here's a very beautifully designed pedestrian bridge across the waterfront in Singapore. This is an example of a wooden winter garden structure in England. a hill town village with buildings stepping down the hill, and a children's museum. So these are opportunities that could be, that this scheme would offer. The second one, we gave the name Centennial City because the idea was economic redevelopment for the next century. Businesses, but with this recreational overlay. And the idea that people can be working downtown, take a lunch break and ride their bike, go fishing, do these outdoor related activities. It's just a great thing that you have here, and we would want this redevelopment to capture that. So this one identifies potential for having a recreation and sports complex out on the boat storage area. They could be an indoor, year-round sports facility. Then expanding the waterfront area with building a new seawall. So you'd have a little boat basin there with a viewing platform out on the end of it. This could potentially be a hotel site, again capturing the views that you have in that location. In terms of connecting to downtown, by walking around downtown and looking at opportunities, we think F Street has a unique opportunity to be a very strong pedestrian corridor in downtown. Because it's not a through street, on the southern end is anchored by Town Square and the Performing Arts Center. On the north end, it ends on a natural kind of overlook where the hillside protrudes out northward, and it could be a really beautiful kind of promenade that you would have this 180-degree view, and then from there a pedestrian bridge could span over the tracks and take you to this new town square. So you'd have that could create the framework for a lot of pedestrian-oriented businesses to locate on F Street and connect back to Town Square. Also has the advantage for pedestrian bridge that it's about 400 feet shorter than from any other street because of the way the topography juts out to the north. Then the warehouse building and any new buildings along First Avenue could be the location for startup companies, incubator spaces, makerspace type of businesses to encourage entrepreneurs and new businesses down in this area. We are very much aware of all the issues around restarting the old power plant as a gas-fired plant, but if it were feasible, it would be a great element to have in such a plan as this, because it could provide locally generated power to new businesses and waste heat to heat buildings. And in that scenario, you could have a greenhouse that would be heated very economically from the waste heat, and you could grow produce to support local restaurants. And want to point out Whitney Avenue. If you recall the earlier diagram about the pinch point here, we've looked at this, and there was actually a previous multimodal study that came to the same conclusion that it'd be very desirable to realign that and move Whitney to the north of the power plant. So you eliminated that pinch point by the dam and moved the truck traffic out of the way and reconnected further to the east. That also allowed you to create more of a kind of a park environment around Chip Creek, so it'd be much more pleasant public space for people to go visit Chip Creek. The final piece of this is something that was also recommended in the 2000 multimodal plan, and this is a new flyover bridge from Loop Road. It goes over Ship Creek and connects directly to Ingra Gamble. That is the preferred route for truckers to go to Seward, because that connects directly to the Seward Highway, and they don't have to go down C Street and then make the dogleg down the south end of town. It would also connect them to the Glen Highway going northbound, and would not take them through as part of downtown traffic lights and so forth. So the Trucking Association and the Port are very keen to try to implement these two specific things, realignment of Whitney and a new flyover bridge to Ingra Gamble. Now, that same bridge has been identified as part of the Cabata project, but it doesn't, at least functionally speaking, is not dependent on Cabata because it works on its own as a significant improvement to freight movement for this area. Similarly to the first one, the trail linkages would be much strengthened around the coast and connecting to the Ship Creek Trail. But if there were the flyover bridge for trucks, it might be possible to take the roadway of the AC Couplet Bridge and reduce some of the laneage for cars and make the bicycle and pedestrian part wider. That requires further study, but that may be possible if you moved all the freight traffic off the bridge, and be something to look at as a way to connect across the Government Hill. Water access could be also much improved. Talked about realigning Whitney. The little site where the old Airmark building is could be converted to a creekside park for the public. Then the waterfront here out near the boat launch would be much improved with a boardwalk that wrapped around this boat basin. And the street grid would be connected, would connect all the sites within Ship Creek. And this shows the different uses: hotels, sports, residential, and businesses. And an amphitheater, in this case, just next to the Saturday market. Some of the potential signature design features here could be this new waterfront with a hotel, a sports complex structure, this F Street overlook, and a pedestrian bridge that connected to this new town square. And finally, this new bridge itself. If you think of San Francisco, the image there is the Golden Gate Bridge, and for New York, it's the Brooklyn Bridge. So a bridge all by itself could be this signature design feature, even without the architectural elements. Just some examples: an indoor sports facility, an overlook on the hillside, a pedestrian bridge, a climbing wall. So any one of these things could be something that became a strong design element. Okay, the third one is really kind of taking all this a bit further. We were actually challenged by our BGI partner to think longer term, more of a 100-year perspective than a 10 or 20-year perspective. And one of our thoughts when we first came here is that Anchorage is a waterfront city without a real waterfront because of the tidal flats. And so we asked ourselves the question, could you create a waterfront? And many cities have improved their waterfronts and expanded their waterfronts through landfill. That's what we looked at here. So the idea is to take the boat launch area, expand it to the south through landfill, and then create this crescent-shaped harbor that would extend downtown to the west and create a real urban waterfront where people could actually get to the water. So a number of the key features here. Number one is actually to move the train station. We thought to make Anchorage a destination, one thing would be that first impression. If you get off a train, it would be a much better experience to get off a train, look across a waterfront, and see Mount McKinley or the Sleeping Lady, and be in an active waterfront environment. The other direction, go on a pedestrian bridge and land right in the heart of downtown at the Resolution Point. And then you're right near the center of activity of much of downtown. A new wharf or dock that would be multi that could handle, in the future, if there were ferry service, if there are day cruises, the cruise ships that you get could all be accommodated on such a dock facility. In our meetings with the port, they would be very happy not to have the cruise ships come into their operation. It's a security problem, it's an operational problem. And as an arrival experience as a tourist, I don't think anybody here would want to consider that a first-rate kind of experience. So something like this would be a great improvement to that. And we think it's a bit of chicken and egg in terms of cruise ship businesses. You know, right now, if they do bring a cruise here, then they have that experience. It's not exactly reinforcing them in terms of incentives to do that more in the future. We think this would be a big improvement. There's a second new water environment here, which would be a freshwater marsh. We know similar things have been proposed before, but in talking to people here, this would be a good location because it could be fed from the outflow from Ship Creek. You could create this marsh environment, which would be a great bird habitat. You get boardwalks going across it to be able to get to it. And then in this case, this would be a fantastic hotel site on the water, and with all the views, it'd be pretty spectacular. Then the balance of the railroad property here could be redeveloped for a business center, office use, and then residential townhouse type development starting from 3rd Avenue. Again, the trail connections will be much improved. I left off one important thing. That is, 4th Avenue is your main street. It'd be fantastic if you could just keep going on 4th Avenue, do a flyover over the track, and then come right down on this new waterfront and connect everything back to downtown. Come down here, go on the waterfront, come back around here around the marsh and make this loop. So it would actually be integrated with your downtown street grid. The trail connections would be linked together, as we saw in the previous schemes. The waterfront access would be just an entirely new experience in terms of the marsh environment, this new dock facility, this harbor environment, and the extension of Elderberry Park out into this point. I mentioned the connectivity of the streets, and then the various uses. This would allow for any number of uses. Certainly should be a mixed-use environment, but we see generally more residential down here by Bootlegger Cove, more lower buildings, and then gradually stepping up higher as you go to the north, where you're not impeding views as much. Some opportunities for design features. This is an example of an art installation in Scandinavia. It's LED lights suspended on a wire mesh, and we thought right out here on this point, something like that, doesn't have to be that, but some very visible, bold work of art or sculpture would be a fantastic element. This is a floating stage, and that was our thought for this amphitheater. But again, we come back to it's windy and cold, maybe that's not the best spot. This is in Seattle, but we thought, for example, you could take part of Elderberry Park and extend it over the tracks to connect to that curving park that leads out to the water. So an urban waterfront, you get to handle all kinds of uses, can be very active. You could have markets there, fairs and so forth, and really integrate it to the life of the city. So those are the three. Downtown North, more of a residential focus. Centennial City, more of an economic development, business focus. Gateway to Alaska has a tourism focus, but not to the exclusion of anything else. But it's really, kind of addressing Anchorage as a destination and a way to arrive in Alaska. And we recognize very much that none of these are something that you could go out and build in 5 or 10 years. This is a long-term vision. It requires significant investment, public and private. But we kind of want to narrow down what that long-term vision is, something to work to over the years, over generations, and build a consensus around it. And so we're we're here to hear your comments and your input.
Sorry for coming in a little late.
Oh, no
on my
problem.
schedule. Has there been discussion, I know this is all pre-planning and architectural design, any discussion on the stability of the land down there, you know, given the 64 earthquake and the slides and all that kind of stuff? Is there any concerns about that?
Certainly concerns, and we have some information. We don't have all the detailed information, and we know anything that's done in this area has to deal with that. And we know there's a technical consideration, a regulatory consideration, and a cost factor. There's no question. Once we narrow it down to the final option, and take it to the next level of development, we're going to get into more detail about that. But as a general statement, yes, we're aware. You know, we know what happened in the '64 quake. We know about the buttress area and certain things. We're not experts, but we're aware of those issues.
So a suggestion would be you're probably aware of the Geotechnical Advisory Commission.
Yeah. That we were just told that that report should be coming out soon, and we look forward to getting it.
And then another one, Mr. Chair, if we could follow up. Any idea on either one of those, of roughly, I'm talking the bare bones infrastructure, what kind of public cost might be involved in? No.
No, that's our next step.
Got it.
And we do have development partners to help us with that, and also look at sources for financing. But that's the next step.
I like the gateway concept. It really encompasses pretty much everything, and it also, you're talking, like you say, longer term vision. But I can imagine, no matter what we do, we're talking a significant investment, as you said.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Oh, sure.
Tim?
Yeah, I also like the gateway idea or concept. 14-foot tidal range is a big, significant feature on the waterfront issue. Ice is also significant, ice flow coming down, connect. Beluga whales, endangered species, things like that are also issues. The power plant, should the power plant come up, although I'm sure that ML&P would be happy with that, but should it come up, that would give you some warm water that you might be able to keep that basin open or something.
That's interesting.
That's a great idea.
I don't know the impact on the salmon with that aspect. I have heard from people that they would like to see something with the creek itself, like rapids built in as opposed to the dam for recreation of kayaks and things like that, whether it be to give tourists something or whether it be to give locals something or something like that.
Could I ask you about that? Because in one of our public sessions, a couple of people, and one man in particular, was complaining bitterly about the dams and that they are no longer, don't serve any purpose, and they impede the fish swimming upstream, spawning, and we don't know. But I mean, to that point, is that
There's a brand new
in the cards?
hatchery there, and so
Right.
obviously the hatchery issue has to be dealt with.
Right.
But it hasn't done well in flood control. It washes out the trail almost every year, I think, up above the Ship Creek there, on the golf course and things like that up by Elmendorf. But it just seems to me you got the creek, and the creek ought to be some central aspect. Fishing, you're not going to want to, or could you ever get rid of the fishing on Ship Creek? It's just a huge attraction to locals as well as tourists. And then my concern about all that building on that third option that I kind of like is the fact that railroad goes through the middle of it, and you got to make sure you keep that corridor clear. If you're going to build something, an extension of 4th Avenue, well, you got to worry about the railroad there. I don't know the elevation difference between the tracks and what's there. Anyway, but so planning wise, I like the idea of trying to get the commercial traffic to a couplet. I've always believed that the highway to highway, which is connecting the Glen, the northbound and the southbound highways, should be where if a bridge were to come in, that would be the place for it to come in. Well, it also is a good place for the truck traffic to go. That may be your north terminus or something. I also like the connectivity of the trails right now, the fact that the trails aren't connected through Ship Creek. You know, it just would be a lot better should you have those connections. And, the other thing, the hillside where the market is, where the Saturday market is, that bluff needs to be maintained. It's an asset as far as I'm concerned in terms of for community activities, for sitting out in that rare day where we have nice sunshine, sitting out on there. People who go to the Saturday market use it, go down and eat lunch. So that I think is important. But I kind of like some connection. Right now there is not a good connection between the downtown city and the railroad and Ship Creek. I mean, you've got conflicts between the commercial or the industrial and the commercial and tourism part of town. So I like something grand. If you're going to use that space, make it grand. But I'm not sure the rail yard is beautiful. So it's kind of right there. Well, to some people, I'm sure it is. Pat Flynn, they love it. Interesting concept.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for coming.
My comment would be wow on all three. I think the creativity there is just phenomenal. One thing that popped into my mind though, Centennial City, the sports complex, parking.
Well, exactly, good point. We had thought you could park under it and put it on a plinth. However, we think even more significant is the fact that by nature you have the peaks of people trying to get there, and you really only have one road to get there. We think it might just be not a great location in the final analysis because it's really only served by one street. So we need to really think about that. I'm not sure that will pan out in the end.
Yeah.
It's a very good point.
Well, short of that, my compliment to you in that, I love the fact that you were able to let the creativity just run free without cost being a consideration.
So far.
So you won the lottery or you're gonna pay for this?
Did you just buy a ticket in Florida?
I say that a bit tongue in cheek because quite honestly, what we're looking at here would totally transform this city. And I think the thing that really drives a project like this is the pride that the city takes in itself and what it's willing to do to transition. And quite honestly, Ship Creek has always just kind of been there. I'm very, very pleased with all three. I do have to admit, I'm part of that group. I wouldn't want to be sitting in that amphitheater down there at that point. The coldest I've ever been is at the Hilton Hotel. I swear to God, that's the coldest corner in the world.
I have to ask you a question, okay? There was a visual, and I want to know what city where that person sinking in water was, that statue?
It's a
That's
little
pretty,
morbid.
it's pretty morbid. Yeah,
That's-
where is that at?
That's actually not a statue, it's a stage that's built, and if you go back, those books, she's holding a book, that's
Oh, I
where
see.
the actors are, and it's in Bregenz, Austria.
I can't.
And they rebuild it every year, so it's a new stage,
That's-
depending on the
yeah, that's a
production
set.
each year.
I mean, I love art, okay, and New Age, and all of that, the above, but that's pretty morbid looking to me.
Well, so here's
Wow.
the seating, and that's the stage. So our thought was that you would have, this would be the seating, that's a floating stage, and depending on which production it was, it would be different. But you would have this wonderful, you'd be sitting here, the sun is setting, you'd be looking off in the distance. But if you're freezing, it's not gonna be much fun, so you've gotta rethink that.
It gets kind of cold. The other
All
thing,
the seats come with electric blankets.
There you go.
if I could, Ernie.
A lot of plug-ins.
Ernie, one other thing, one other note on that. You were talking about the birds down in the pond and stuff like that. I'm not sure the Air Force Base would be all that happy about having any birds any too close to the runway. But we could clip their wings and keep them there like they do down in the duck pond.
The windmills take care of all the birds, probably.
But it is exciting, and frankly, I'm excited to see some changes in this city that make
Yeah.
our city look like other cities this big. You know, our population is probably over 300,000 now, and it's time for some new age, if you will, change.
Mr. Honeman?
What are the Ps indicating of?
Parking.
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 Good thoughts. A lot of parking.
Yeah.
Are we talking parking structures or just lots?
Be a combination, but certainly to get the kind of walkability, you'd certainly need to have some structured parking. Because if you park everything on lots, then everything gets so spread out, it's just too suburban. So we see it more like the continuation of downtown, that kind of density. Yeah, gets phased in as the population.
Anybody? Well, thank you. We
Thank
really
you very much.
appreciate the heads up and that you made the effort to get in touch with me. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you for
Thanks for coming.
You bet.